Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. NATO 2025 summit has concluded, and I gotta say, I am stunned because, wow, the decisions that came out of this summit are borderline devastating for Putin and obviously good for us and Ukraine. So let's get into nitty-gritties because we have a lot of good news both from the NATO summit and other thing. I would even say like a torrent of great news. Strap in and let's go. And we start with the final declaration of the NATO alliance coming out of this NATO summit, which has some fantastic elements in it. Just dive into this. First things first is that all countries in the NATO alliance agree to have 5% GDP annual defense spending by 2035. We obviously know the history that this is an issue, that the countries don't spend as much, but this commitment is new and it's much higher than the 2%. So overall, it's a major win, and I'm glad to see that even the countries that are already spending a lot are now getting recognition, and we are aiming for that higher spending. And generally, the rhetoric around these 5% is, yes, we need to reach it by the 2035, but it is expected that we will put more effort and we go more towards this Cold War era spending, where Russia is that major threat and adversary to the Europeans and the whole NATO alliance. So don't be discouraged if you think about these 5% in the same way of the 2% beforehand, because the whole feeling, the rhetoric, and just general approach to things has changed significantly, and now these 5% are a major buildup. These 5% consists of two parts. 3.5% is going to be the spending that goes into the defense that was the same as before. What countries contribute to their militaries, training, ammunition, and other things we would consider to be direct spending on the defense by any country. So everything that sustains the military. But more interesting is the second part, which is 1.5% GP, that is going to be dedicated to the infrastructure, sort of looking at what Germany did with their model and kind of referencing a lot of those ideas, stating that militaries need to be not only capable in the military sense, but there needs to be a supporting infrastructure around those militaries that will help boost the capabilities of militaries. So that most likely will include investments into rail, investments into communications, investments into road infrastructure and stuff like this. This is a major win because now countries can sort of write off a lot of things to get to this NATO 5% contribution, and all of those things will be beneficiary for every citizen of European Union in general, and more importantly, it will help all of the semi-military companies out there that would like to do some work but still help to contribute to defense of their country. And especially I would like to underscore the word innovation here, because I hope that will mean that we will get some kind of a new generation perspectives, maybe new type of trains, new type of systems, electric charger stations, potentially for some electronic systems. All of these things are getting me very excited to see that Europe basically says, let's spend more, let's invest more, let's do it big, and let's make sure that we're defended on all fronts. And one of the very important parts of the statement from the North Atlantic Alliance here is the sentence at the end of the point 3 right over here, which says that will include direct contributions towards Ukraine defense and its defense industry when calculating allies' defense spending. Do you understand what it means? It means that if a country contributes to Ukraine and helps Ukraine win, it's not an extra help, it is a part of defense budget. So now countries can contribute to Ukraine more and not be constrained by the fact that they're not spending enough money on their defense. So this opens a huge window of opportunity for Europeans to work with Ukrainians in massive new ways. It is a super, super important statement, and it can be utilized in many ways. Now, obviously, I want to make sure that it gives the opportunity. It doesn't bind countries to help Ukraine more, but it does help the countries that do want to help Ukraine. And we know that there is plenty of those in Europe, and they will benefit greatly from this part of the statement. Coming into this summit, there was a lack of understanding whether or not NATO is going to be standing behind Ukraine as an organization. There was some shaky grounds with some of the NATO member states. There were shaky grounds with United States. But no, not only Ukraine was not excluded from this alliance discussion. It seems that we got even more inclusion of Ukraine in participation in alliance procedures and alliance structures. Fantastic news, great general communique that we got here from the member states. And I can say that if beforehand we were questioning whether NATO is still relevant or not, with this summit, it was monumentally assured that NATO is still very relevant and we are very much willing to go forward. I am very optimistic, cautiously optimistic, but optimistic towards the future of the alliance going forward. It seems we are moving slowly back towards that rock-solid standing of the alliance on the value of Article 5, and with increased defense spending and contributions to Ukraine, I have really only great words to say. Even Trump changed a lot of this rhetoric, and someone made a great statement stating, let's say, well, maybe that's how you need to interact with Trump. Maybe every time some important decisions need to be made, he just needs to go and bomb some country over the seas, and that kind of gets his mood up. I'm obviously joking here at the expense of Iranians, but overall, even Trump looked relatively decent, and he actually made some okay statement. Now, it was still absolute brain rot when you listen to them live, but when you read them written, then they actually kind of make sense. But more importantly, Trump met with Zelensky, and they had a great discussion, and Zelensky was able to convey a lot of very good points to President Trump here. Specifically, President Zelensky, and I know definitely other European leaders, were very keen on selling Trump the idea for allowing Ukraine to buy US weapons. As I explained many times before on this channel, the best case scenario for everyone would be US to kind of back away from their contribution of negotiations between Russia and Ukraine and just kind of leave it be, while just not helping Russia, maybe supporting some of the European sanctions and allowing Ukraine to buy weapons from US. That, for me, is like the optimistic best case scenario. And the fact that Trump and how he was addressing these later down the line, and just general vibes that we got from the discussion about the Patriot missile systems, which are the things that Ukraine cannot just substitute from the European allies, it has been great news seeing that Trump is being more and more pushed towards agreeing on sales of weapons to Ukrainians, and I'm really hoping for that. Also, President Zelensky briefed Donald Trump on what was happening in Istanbul and how poorly the negotiations went there and how Russia didn't want to go for any kind of ceasefire. But more importantly, he also explained the benefits of those meetings, the exchange of prisoners in ongoing. And very interestingly, he highlighted the case that Russians are sending their dead men to Ukraine to essentially pretend that those are dead Ukrainians that Russia is sending back to Ukraine, whereas in reality, those are Russians. I don't know if they're doing it to inflate the numbers or to hide that some of those dead Russians are dead and still count them as missing in action. But whatever the case, it was a definitely interesting example, and knowing how Trump operates, I'm hoping that on this picture of it over here, Zelensky had like big pictures showing like Russian, not Russian, like Ukrainian, Russian. At least I think so, because it needs to be explained in a very simple terms. Or it could be when Zelensky explained what's the situation on the battlefield, because we know for Trump he needs to have that visual aid, and maybe Zelensky was explaining how actually poorly Russia is doing overall on the front line, that even their invasion in Sumy is not going that well. Russia was really hoping and expecting that their offensive in Sumy will go much better than their offensive last year to Kharkiv went, had. And unfortunately, it doesn't really go that well. Ukrainians have counterattacked. They stopped the Russian advance in Sumy. And as described here by the active armed forces of Ukraine, member, the Sumy direction as of now. The Russians can't calm down. The commanders are throwing their infantry to hell. There is no other way to call it. Out of an assault groups of 8 to 10 people, 2-3 managed to survive at best. There is the deterioration in morale. Some smart Russians are simply leaving their positions, and others, we also know, just surrender. Basically, Russian generals and commanders, because they're losing positions, and they already reported that they've captured the positions and secured them. Now they are saying, it's like, no, we cannot report that we lost anything. Send in more meat waves. And it's absolute slaughterhouse for Russians over there. Again, great job by the Ukrainian armed forces, and Sumy direction is definitely becoming another nightmare scenario for the Russians. There was some very important statements from President Zelensky. For example, he and Mark Rutte stated that NATO countries from now on will classify data on further assistance to Ukraine. This is great news. To be honest, it was insane that this was not happening before. Like, I know that you want to know, that I want to know that the countries are helping Ukraine. But if we're talking military sense, military perspectives, the fact that this was not the case was insanity. Like, this is basic. Zelensky also made important statements that Ukraine will soon begin exporting their military technologies abroad. Production lines will be created in Europe that will produce Ukrainian weapons for both Europe and Ukraine. Fantastic news. This is marvelous news. Ukraine needs to have safe production spots. Ukrainians need to have their technology produced somewhere where they cannot be bombed by Russia. And this is great news. And I definitely know for sure that Denmark is going to be one of those front-runner countries. So I can't wait to report potentially on how good it is that Denmark is supporting Ukraine by allowing Ukrainian weapons to be produced here on the territory of Denmark. Yeah, go Denmark. And another fantastic comment here. Zelensky stating that I thought we would have changes in the figures, that we would reduce the production of artillery and purchase more drones. As of today, we have no problems with financing the military-industrial complex. There will be an increase in production of artillery. There will be an increase in the production of UAVs. There is no talks of savings. More investments happening and going into Ukraine. I talked that the Ukraine would probably need around 2 years to get their shit together to start production on the level that they could really compete with Russia. And so far, it seems that despite some of the fluctuation with US backing off and Ukrainians need to essentially invest more into like day-to-day weapons rather than development of new weapon lines, I think overall we're still moving in the right direction. And so far, I'm still optimistic by that end of 2026 timeline where Ukrainian output together with the help from Europeans will by itself already match whatever Russia is putting forward and arguably can actually bring Ukraine forward just because of the access to technology that Ukraine has. Just for reference, in 2022, it was $1 billion. In 2023, it was $3 billion. In 2024, it was $10 billion. And in 2025, it's $43 billion and counting. Ukrainians are really rising their investments into defense industries, including the investments from the Europeans. Massive numbers. And this 43 billion, that's not even the end number. We might see even bigger increase. Ukraine aimed to attract 30 to 35 billion this year, but we're already supposedly over that. Devastating news for Russians. This is really bad news if you are Russian in Ukraine. But the good news keep coming, and we're not even close at ending, because Ukraine and Ukrainian allies have declared that they have successfully tested the anti-glide bomb systems to shoot down the bane of Ukrainian existence, the glide bombs. If you remember the recap how Russia fights, they need this firewall that they throw at Ukrainian side, so Ukrainians feel suppressed in their positions. Only then their current tactic of these large assault groups on motorcycles can work, because other than that, Ukrainians would just have defensive positions and they will just basically destroy these motorcycles. And aviation bombs are the only thing that are saving Russia, because Russian artillery has been decimated by Ukrainians over 2 years now, targeted campaign at destroying Russian artillery and Russian artillery advantage. Russian artillery has been, if not fully reduced to ground, that would be unfair to say, but now it's more targeted. It's not like this firewall that it was before. So the only thing that Russia was able to do is to use these massive glide bombs to really alter the scenario in their favor. And even more devastating for Russia is that Ukrainians have live-tested and demonstrated the test of the Ukrainian analog of the glide bomb. This is really bad news, because Ukraine is basically showing here that, you know, two can play this game. Ukrainians obviously has the French hammer systems that they're using to drop on Russian positions. Why Ukrainians were not using the same aviation bombs as Russian is because a lot of Russian aviation bombs that they're using with these glide bombs are meant to kind of work with the quantity. They are not super precise. They kind of need this density still to target Ukrainian position. Ukrainians cannot really do this. For Ukraine, this system needs to be a lot more precise. So it took Ukrainians a while to develop this system, but now Ukrainians will be able to produce this cheap alternative and put it on their growing number of the F-16 fleet. So soon, Russians on the front line are gonna start experiencing exactly the same thing that Ukrainians had to experience beforehand, with these massive bombs dropping on their heads. Good luck. And Russian military is not doing hot. It's not doing hot at all. So here you can see recorded losses of Russian armored fighting vehicles. We see this last two columns here. You can see that the drop is like absolutely down. Russia basically either run out of the infantry fighting vehicles or any armored vehicles, or they just like completely drop them as a class, which is I don't know if it's a good or bad news. Maybe they think that they found a new solutions, but it's definitely bad news for the Russian soldiers. Remember, right now, Russia still has a little bit of advantage. That's why they can use these light cavalry motorcycle-based tactics. But if Ukrainians do get their production up, if aviation bombs will get shut down, and if Ukrainians will be able to dominate more, both in the big air and let's say small air, with now Magyar's groups stating that they will be hunting down the Russian drone operators, then there is a huge chance that this commitment to these man-wave tactics with little to no armored vehicles at all, that would only underscore that Russians are going to be exposed to a very, very bad time. And in the meantime, Ukrainians keep going to Crimea. Russia lost the naval war. Russia lost the Black Sea to Ukrainians. So now Ukrainians going and using these surface vessels on the sea are carrying the FPV drones that are then flying into Crimea, and FPV drones are destroying these massive, expensive Russian anti-air assets. It just continues happening non-stop. It's really, really glorious. Russians are losing insane amounts of money. They're losing insane resources, and they cannot really leave Crimea undefended. They need to send in more resources, but this is like just becoming an absolute nightmare for Russians. Coming every couple of weeks, we see the decimation of major Russian assets in Crimea. Then Sweden rolling in with great news. Initially, it was expected that the JS-39 Gripens would be dismantled to produce the new Gripens EFs. But this decision now has been overturned, and instead, the new components will be produced for the new Gripens, which opens the availability of these existing Gripens 39 to potentially be transferred to Ukraine. And we're talking about approximately 60 Gripens that could be delivered to Ukraine. That would be a massive boost to Ukrainian aviation, and I'm really, really, really hopeful for this, because Sweden is a big supporter of Ukraine, and if they can now, with these decisions that's been taken at the NATO summit, write it off as a defense spending, amazing. We also got some details on these light airplanes that Syrskyi says they will be requesting to buy from all across the world. And it's actually even better than I thought, because I initially thought that they will be hunting the drones across the skies, but actually the idea is to install the electronic warfare systems on these planes and then basically fly like this mobile flying electronic warfare system suppressing the Russian drones. That is, to be honest, genius. If this will work, if this will help to destroy and suppress Russian unmanned system for unmanned vehicles, that would be a great contribution against the Russian Shahid strikes. Some recognition on the effectiveness of sanctions. The head of the office of the president of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, has stated that because of the sanctions from the Europeans and Americans, Russian shadow fleet has been basically halved. It's been gutted, and more sanctions should be rolled out for the shadow fleet because we see that it is working. Russia is definitely having more trouble exporting their oil now than before. Then a quick comment on the question that I get sometimes with regards to Svalki Gap being the weakness of Europe. Svalki Gap is an area between Belarus and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad. And the idea is that Russia can easily cut the Svalki Gap, therefore cutting off the Baltics from the mainland Europe. And to be able to do that, Russia needs to mass quite a lot of forces. I already explained that a lot in the previous streams that I had. But more importantly, for example, Kaliningrad, Russia is pulling a lot of troops from there. There is almost no troops in Kaliningrad. So that exclave is extremely vulnerable. So if there is any activity around Svalki Gap and if there is any action around Svalki Gap, it seems the strategy of just taking over the Kaliningrad region of Russia is a great defense tactic. So people that are panicking about Svalki Gap, hold your horses. The fact that Russia is pulling their troops just shows that Russia is not expecting any kind of full-scale conflict with the European states. They are going to be aiming to do some kind of a hybrid warfare if they will be able to do so. Because to be honest, with Trump's activity now in Iran, it is now going to be a big question for Putin if he will commit to trying to test the Article 5 of NATO that actually has been reinforced, as I stated before in this video. And another call that I do here to all of the Europeans to wake up, because we are being attacked. Russia does not distinguish between the hybrid warfare and warfare. And just now we saw Russians actually sabotage some of the Bundeswehr equipment and burning some of the Bundeswehr trucks that are, these are not Ukraine donated trucks. These are trucks in Germany that are being burned by Russians. They are burning our military equipment. This is warfare. This is sabotage. We are at war with Russia and we need to treat it the same way. And finally, I would like to give a shout out and thanks to all of the people that participated in the Summer Sunshine campaign. We contributed overall over 45,200, almost 200 euros. Thank you to everyone that did it. Thank you so much for supporting Ukraine. We can do a lot more together. We will be doing a lot more together. And I know that there might be some people that still would like to contribute. Guys, instead of contributing to this campaign that we already did, I will just gonna plug in a friend of the channel, Johnny M.S. Pierce, in ATP Geopolitics. He has a campaign on the same Summer Sunshine, like a general campaign in Car for Ukraine. So if you want to support my channel, if you like what we do, if you want to hear more news from Ukraine, and the fact that Ukraine is going to be winning this war now with the new decisions and news that we've got, support as well Johnny M.S. Pierce. I love you. Slava Ukraini, trust in Ukrainian armed forces, and I will see you next time.